Hi. I have loved superheroes for a long time. Beyond that phase where I got into Marvel in like 2020, which I know is really late, but I had a lot of extra time on my hands. One of my favorite films of all time is The Incredibles, and I've loved that film since I was like tiny. That being said, it took me until this year to approach DC in any capacity, and boy am I glad the way that I got into DC was Superman. Being a Marvel fan, I've obviously encountered James Gunn's work before and the Guardians of the Galaxy films. I think they're some of the strongest Marvel films out there, but for some reason it caught me completely off guard just how good this film was gonna be. Like, I went into it with almost no expectations whatsoever, apart from I'd heard that a few people had said it was good. I needed something to watch for my birthday, and I'm glad Superman was the choice, because since watching it, I have not been able to stop thinking about it. And as such, to deal with all these emotions that I'm feeling about this film, I've decided to make a little video on it. So here are my thoughts on Superman as someone who has never interacted with DC before. One thing that I really have to applaud this film for is how well paced it is. I know with superhero films it tends to be an issue that there's like loads going on, and then out of nowhere they try to wrap everything up in like the last 15 minutes and it just doesn't work. This is the case with a lot of recent Marvel projects. This film didn't really have that problem. Yes, there are a lot of characters and a lot of plot lines tied to those characters, but they all sort of converge at like a good time. It doesn't feel like we spend too long with like 20 different things happening at once and it's like, oh, how do we keep up? No, it feels like the film has good momentum and it always feels like it's going somewhere. And honestly, it did not feel like it was, 2 hours, 10 minutes-ish? Is that the runtime? Something like that. I'll check in editing and you'll find out whether I was right or wrong. But it didn't feel like the length it was. It honestly felt like I blinked and it was over, which sounds bad, but I think it's a real achievement if a film can feel shorter than its runtime, because that makes me feel like I'm like really immersed in it. So yay. As part of plot, I wanted to talk about a couple of scenes that stood out to me. I mean, like, I spent the whole thing kind of like, whoa, what's going on, but like in a good way. But there were a few scenes that I wanted to talk about that really stuck with me, because unfortunately I've only been able to see it once. I would like to see it again, but because I've only seen it once, my memory is but there are some scenes that stuck with me anyway, and I think that demonstrates like the real power of them, you know? The opening scene was one that I found super impactful because super impactful. Get a load of this guy. Because we're presented with a vulnerable Superman. Because I know that one criticism that a lot of people have of Superman as a character in pretty much every iteration of his character is that he's boring because he's OP. But in this opening sequence, we are literally presented with the most beaten down version of Superman pretty much imaginable. Like, he literally plummets out of the sky, crash lands in the snow, spits out blood, and then has to call his dog, well, not his dog, but like, he has to call Crypto to come drag him home, essentially. I feel like this scene is a really important one in humanizing him, because it's like, oh, Superman can get hurt too, Superman needs help too, and so on and so on. And Scooby-Dooby-Dooby. I think this theme epitomizes one of this film's central ideas, which is like a human Superman. This film spends so much time humanizing him and making him a complex, rounded character in a way that sort of directly combats the criticism that people have of him being boring and Gary Stu-ish. This film really focuses on humanizing Superman, turning him from this larger-than-life humanoid thing into a real, relatable person. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get on to David's portrayal of Superman. His performance, he's great, by the way. That's in summary, my thoughts are he's great. Everything about this film's great, but I'll get into it in more detail in a little bit. Another scene that I wanted to talk about that kind of ties into the whole humanizing him thing is the scene where Lois interviews Clark as Superman. I think that Clark's relationship with Lois plays a huge part in making him feel more human, because there's something about their dynamic in this sequence that just feels so grounded and real. And I just love the way they bounce off each other. Like, David and Rachel have incredible chemistry. We know this, we see this. If you go watch this film, if you haven't already, I don't even think I have to tell you to pay extra close attention to the scene, because it's like right there. Don't cover your face. It's like right there. The conversation they have manages to bridge the gap between very human, this is a new relationship that's still like finding its legs, feet, I don't know idioms. It bridges the gap between that and all the larger than life superhero stuff Clark as Superman has to deal with. This scene is so interesting in how it's almost a scene between Lois and Clark and Superman. It's like there's almost like three presences in the scene, and it's just so intricately, cleverly written. Also, I didn't realize that the scene was 12 minutes long. Like, once again, credit to the film's pacing. This scene felt like it went so quickly, and I feel like that's like a real achievement in an action film, because obviously you have all this action, all these fight sequences, but the momentum, the action, the drama itself was so corny. The action, but it's true. The drama comes from the conversation and the back and forth between Lois and Clark, and I feel like the energy never drops. It's great. This section's probably going to be really brief, but my main comment is the film isn't great. You have no idea how excited I was to go in and see, literally from like in the cinema when like it comes up with the film's title and the rating, the fact that like that itself was designed to be colourful gave me hope, and then the film followed through. Superman was wearing bright blue, red and yellow. There were bright colours everywhere, and it didn't feel like it was trying to do the gritty realism thing that so many superhero films of late have been doing. I'm tired of it. So many superhero films have been doing that, and I'm so glad that Superman 2025 did not do that. One thing that I've seen a lot of people speak about with this film is how they left the cinema with like a feeling of hope, and yeah, it's partly like the messages and the story itself, so I'll get to that in a bit. I think it's also partly due to the color palette. It feels bright and joyful itself, so the whole film is like injected with this feeling of joy. So many superhero films recently have been like grey in an attempt to portray the real world, but so many people go to the cinema, especially go to superhero movies where all of these things are like fantastical and sci-fi, for escapism. I think leaning into the vibrancy, the cartoonishness, the comic book origin of the story was a really strong artistic choice and a really smart one. One shot that I did want to talk about was, you know, the conversation that Superman has with Lois right after the world's trying to cancel him. And they're in Lois's apartment. So there's Clark and Lois in the foreground, and then I think it's like this space monster with like neon tendrils, I don't know how else to describe it, in the background. And I think that shot is just so gorgeous. One thing I love about this film, and I'm using this scene as an example, is how the spectacular shots aren't necessarily limited to the moments of intense action or like the fight sequences, though there are some pretty cool ones in the fight sequences, don't get me wrong, but I love that this almost showcases a moment of emotional spectacle, if you know what I mean. The depth of Clark and Lois's relationship is treated with the same gravity and import as the action sequences that make this film part of the genre that it is. I'm sure that many will agree with me when I say that this film is full of some of the most interesting characters I've seen in superhero films, or maybe just films in general in a while. Like, genuinely, I don't think there are any characters in the film that I wasn't interested in to at least some degree. And because I don't have the time or capacity to deal with all of them, I'm kind of going to deal with them in groups. So I'm going to talk about some characters that I am interested in and would like to see more of, and then I'm going to break down probably the 4 characters that were most interesting to me. Starting with the group that work at the Daily Planet, even though we didn't see that much of them, I feel like they are such an interesting group of characters. Like that scene where they're trying to write the article to expose Lex, even though it was such a short scene and it was intercut with other action sequences happening elsewhere, I feel like we got, or at least started to get, an understanding of the workplace dynamic. They all feel like individuals with their own backstories, and they all feel multi-dimensional, and that makes me really excited to hopefully get to know them better in future films. Because trust me, after this film and how it impacted me, I think I'm gonna be sticking with DC for a while, especially if James Gunn's involved. The Justice Gang's another interesting group. And I feel like they work quite well almost as like a character foil to Superman, because you have this guy who essentially works on his own and does good because he believes it's the right thing to do, versus this essentially corporately run superhero group who are kind of there to be in and out, get the job done, and they don't really have much problem with killing, which is a huge difference from Clark, who pretty much only kills if necessary. Like, he saves a squirrel from being crushed. He went back to save a squirrel. I think that's adorable, and I think that moment is probably one of the defining moments where I was like, this guy's he's different. He's built different. Where Clark tries at all costs to preserve life, the Justice Gang does not have much of a problem with killing. And while I'm not gonna police how one should do their superheroing, but I think that that's an interesting difference to have, and it's even more interesting when they interact with each other. But enough about those other guys. Let's get on to my top 4. I honestly don't think I can call it a definitive top 4 because I love all of these characters, truly. But these are 4 that I probably have the most to say about. I'm gonna start basic, and I'm gonna talk about why Superman is one of my favorite characters in Superman. Honestly, I think David Corenswet is perfect for this role. Genuinely perfect. I mean, first things first, the guy looks like Superman. Like if I saw that guy on the street, I would believe you if you told me that that's Superman. Which sounds not as like impactful as I wanted it to now that I've said it. He looks perfect for the role, is the point that I'm trying to make here. But beyond that, I think one of his strongest assets is that he is able to so clearly make the distinction between Superman and Clark Kent. Not necessarily in terms of like values and stuff, but in terms of like physicality as an actor. I think that he does an incredible job. What I mean by that is Superman as a character is a large presence. He's a superpowered being. He flies around. He's a hero. He is like the hero ever, actually. But he obviously takes up a lot of space, not necessarily in terms of like his physical presence, but more like his presence in a room. And what I think that David Corenswet does that is really interesting is that even though Clark is obviously the same physical size as Superman, his body language feels as though he's trying to make himself smaller. Like when we first see Clark, he's rushing to work in the middle of a crowd. His body language feels as though he's trying to take up less space, and he feels like dorky almost, like it's endearing. He goes from being this imposing figure to being like, he feels like your cousin. I don't know why. Clark Kent feels like someone's cousin, whereas Superman feels like something you've never encountered before, which you haven't, because he's a Superman. Or he's not the kind of guy you meet every day. One more thing I wanted to say about the Clark-Superman distinction is, once again, in that interview scene with Lois, there is a moment where you can see like a switch flip in his head where he goes from being Clark to Superman, and it is insane to watch Like, it's in the trailer as well, and I actually only watched the trailer after I'd watched the film. But even in the film as well, I was like, oh, I'm watching an actor act his face off.
Ready?
Let's do it, Cronkite.
Superman.
Miss Lane.
While he's sat back in the chair, he's just, that's Clark Kent chatting with his girlfriend Lois. He sits forward in the chair, and it's like, that's a different guy. Nothing changed about his physical appearance, but that's a different person. And I think that's just so cool. And I think that it's this distinction that David's able to make as an actor, as well as what wardrobe is doing, because if you put these two side by side, like, they are two different men. You can't tell me otherwise. I think that it's this notable difference that makes Superman having and maintaining a secret identity feel believable. I love that he plays Superman in a way that feels so human. I've already spoken about his relationship with Lois, but also in his interactions with Ma and Pa Kent. Like, that feels like someone's son. Once again, another character that I've already spoken a bit about, but Lois is really, really cool. I think it's both credit to Rachel Brosnahan's performance and James Gunn's writing that she feels like such a well-rounded, intricate character. We love multi-dimensional women. I love that she's not afraid to challenge Superman at any turn. Once again, going back to the interview scene, but she's unafraid to like poke and prod and like challenge his perspectives. Like, she's not just Superman's yes man. She's an intelligent, inquisitive, complex reporter in her own right who just happens to be Clark Kent's girlfriend, who is Superman. She's not just Superman's girlfriend, she's more than that. That being said, even though she's unafraid to challenge Clark, that doesn't mean that she's necessarily in constant conflict with him either. Like, when everyone tries to cancel him for supposedly being sent to Earth to enslave everyone, she is the first to go check on him, and she believes him immediately. Like, I love that the film's conflict doesn't necessarily revolve around like romantic conflict or like tensions in a romantic relationship. Another character that I haven't actually spoken about yet is Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific. Oh my goodness, that is the coolest person I've ever seen. The fight scene at the military base is perhaps top 5 coldest scenes in cinema, period. He's just effortlessly cool, and he's level-headed, calm, chill, and he knows exactly who he is. I think that it's his certainty in his identity that enables him to break away from the Justice Gang and essentially do whatever it is he wants to do, because he doesn't need approval from anyone else, and I just think that's sick. The last character that I wanted to talk about, and I think you knew this was coming considering I haven't spoken about him in detail yet, is Lex Luthor.
Oh my gosh! She's bald! She's bald and she's torturing people who have hair!
Nicholas Hoult is fantastic in this role. I honestly cannot think of anyone who could embody this role better. He's fantastic. That man is hater of the century and is constantly about this far away from a crash out at all times. Honestly, it's nice to have a villain who's just evil. It's nice to have a villain who's just evil. This video isn't meant to just be Marvel shade, but it's one thing that Marvel does a lot, where they give a villain a backstory and like justification for their actions. So they kind of turn them into a sympathetic villain rather than someone we can just easily outright hate. And it's nice to have someone who backs their actions 100%, is aware of the way they're behaving, is aware that it's wrong, but is just so consumed by their envy and hatred of the hero that they just don't care. And it just makes it so easy to have someone to hate. That being said, Nicholas Hoult is so fantastic in this role that I can't even completely hate Lex. Like, I'm just like in awe of his performance in this film. I know that I'm meant to be talking about Lex at the moment, but saying all of that just reminded me of how it's nice to have a hero who isn't like an anti-hero. He's kind of just good. Like, this film does a really good job of setting up the binary opposition of good versus evil, where it's like Superman and Lex are kind of the two extremes of the scale, and it feels like almost like a nice return to form, where we've had so much like moral muddiness in like recent years that it feels like a nice, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, situation. Because the characters are well-rounded and well-written, it doesn't get boring. Anyway, back to Lex. I also love that he's not necessarily maniacally evil, like he's calculated with it, and I think that makes him really interesting because he also knows when he's beat. Like right at the end when he tries to run away but Krypto is not having him and drags him back. Like, I mean, as much as he didn't escape, he was gonna try and escape because he knew, I'm not getting out of this alive. Superman's in my yard, I'm not making it. I think that intelligence doesn't necessarily make him sympathetic, but makes him more believable. I also think that the Lex-Superman dynamic in this film is so fun because it honestly feels like they're going back and forth rage baiting each other. And I think that's just so funny to watch. Like, I was thinking, at what point does this become a comedy? The bit where Lex is, like, there's a close-up of Lex just, like, screaming. Like, he's actually screaming, crying, throwing up. He knocks the mug off the table and then does it again because he hates Superman so much. Like, I think that's so fun. And then on the flip side of that, when Lex takes the dog and then Superman literally crashes into his office and Lex is calm and composed for once. And it's like this power dynamic reversal where Superman's the one crashing out and he's like, where's the dog? And then Lex is deliberately provoking him saying, I don't know what you mean. What dog? Ugly dog in a cape? I have to applaud both performances here because that scene is genuinely one of my favorites. I know I didn't talk about it when I was talking about the scenes that stood out to me, but it's because I knew I was going to talk about it here. Overall, I think that the way that all of these characters are written is just like top tier. And even though we don't spend masses of time with all of them, I think that they're all written in a way that there's room to explore and expand upon them later, which I think is really smart and makes me really excited for the future. This film deals with a lot of messages that I think are super important, such as the pro-Palestinian message and the billionaires are evil message, both of which I was pleasantly surprised to find in a mainstream American film. But there are two themes that I want to expand on specifically. One is what I would probably say the central theme of the film is that a lot of people who have seen the film have spoken about, and that's the kindness is punk rock message. Not to sound too much like Jaden Smith talking about the political and economic state of the world right now, but I think that the film's main message about kindness being cool speaks so directly to the state of society right now, where so many people are falling for far-right propaganda and society is just generally becoming less kind to essentially anyone marginalized. So in a world where kindness is a rarity, yeah, being kind would be seen as something that's radical and essentially punk rock. I love that that's a message that like sort of the iconic superhero is pushing, especially because superhero media, while not necessarily aimed at children and teenagers, is often consumed by them. And so I think this film is going to play an important part in raising a kinder generation. And that's not just to say that it's only young people that it impacts, because I've seen on like TikTok, Twitter, no, I will never call it X, that so many people have said they left the film feeling not only more hopeful, but like they want to do good in the world. And I think that's such a powerful message that this film has been able to communicate, you know? The other main message that I wanted to talk about was less so a message and more a theme. And that's the idea of nature versus nurture. And it's this idea of nature versus nurture that mostly drives Clark's arc. It's this that drives Superman's arc across the course of the film. It's difficult to create a sense of development when a character's whole thing is that they are inherently good. But I think it's this internal identity-based struggle that's created when he hears the rest of the message that his parents left for him, that things start to get interesting. Thinking in terms of analogy, the elves essentially sent Superman to Earth with a white supremacist mission. Upon discovering this, he very understandably struggles with it. Because how does one deal with discovering not only that your parents aren't who you thought they were for the last 30 odd years of your life, but also that you aren't who you think you are. Because these are the only Kryptonians we see in the film, we kind of have to assume that this is a Kryptonian way of thinking. But Superman wasn't raised to think like a Kryptonian, which is arguably in his nature. He was raised to think like a Ken. And it's for this reason that I say that the film shows us that it's not his genetics that make him Superman, his abilities to fly and shoot lasers out of his eyes, which surprisingly did not look as goofy as I thought it would. But it's how the Kens raised him. They raised him to be kind, to be human, and it's these qualities that make him such a Superman. In summary, I really liked this film. If this whole video wasn't evidence enough, my Letterboxd review probably is. Honestly, I think this might be my film of the year. Even though there's like another like third of the year to go, I think Superman might be taking it. I think everyone should go see it if they can, and I personally am super excited to see what James Gunn does with DC and Superman specifically in the future.